Back in 2019, I was living in a small town called Pinebrook. It was tucked away in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by thick woods and endless trees. I was 19 at the time, still figuring things out, and kind of stuck in the same old routine. There wasn't much to do unless you liked being outdoors. Most of us hiked, went fishing, or just sat around campfires for fun. If you wanted to see a movie or go to a restaurant, you'd have to drive almost 2 hours to the next real city. My cousin Jake and I were really close. We had grown up like brothers, and one of our favorite things to do was go camping. It gave us a break from everything and let us feel a little more alive. That summer, Jake told me about a spot someone at his part-time job had told him about. It was supposed to be a hidden gem with a lake view and good space to set up tents. We were excited. It sounded like a perfect weekend getaway, just us, nature, and maybe some ghost stories around the fire. The spot wasn't far, only about a 20-minute drive from the edge of Pinebrook. We didn't see any signs or parking areas, so we just pulled the truck off the road and parked in a patch of tall grass. The trail leading into the woods was barely visible. It was thin, overgrown, and looked like nobody had used it in years. But we were used to exploring weird places, so we shrugged and started walking. The trail twisted and turned through the trees, and after about an hour we came across the campsite. We were expecting this beautiful view of a lake, maybe some clear water and a breeze. But when we got there, it was just this swampy mess. The water was dark green, covered in weeds, and smelled kind of sour. Old branches floated on the surface, and the whole area felt forgotten. It was creepy, but in a quiet way. We joked that Jake's coworker must have been messing with him. Still, we decided to stay. It wasn't pretty, but it was peaceful. As we were setting our stuff down, Jake pointed across the water. There, half hidden behind some trees, was a tent. It was gray and old-looking, just sitting there like it had been abandoned. Then I saw something that made my stomach twist. A person was standing at the edge of the swamp right across from us, completely still. They weren't doing anything, just staring. I couldn't make out their face, but they stood there like statues. I gave a little wave, trying not to seem weird. We figured it was just some quiet hiker who didn't want to chat. After a minute or two, they turned and disappeared into the trees behind their tent. We picked a spot farther from the water, up on a little hill. We spent the day cooking, talking, and playing cards. But every once in a while, we'd glance over at the other side of the swamp. We never saw the person again. The tent was still there, but it didn't look like anyone went in or out. As it started getting dark, things felt different. The woods got real quiet. We got the fire going and made dinner, trying not to let our nerves get to us. We were in the middle of a story when Jake suddenly froze. He was staring at something behind me. I turned around, and that's when I saw them again. Someone was standing just a few steps away from us, barely visible in the firelight. They had long, messy black hair that hung over their face, and they wore a dark hoodie and pants. I couldn't tell if they were holding anything, but they weren't moving. They didn't speak. They just stood there like they were waiting for something. Jake stood up and asked, "Hey, are you okay?" I added, "Do you need help?" No answer. After a few seconds, they turned and walked straight back into the trees without a word. We sat there in silence for a moment, both of us trying to act cool. We made jokes to calm ourselves down, like maybe they were just lost or really shy. But deep down, we were both freaked out. Later that night, I actually managed to fall asleep. Looking back now, I don't know how. I guess we were too young and too stubborn to take it seriously. That changed fast. I woke up to Jake shaking my tent and calling my name in a panicked whisper. I unzipped it and he was standing there breathing hard. His face was pale. "I saw them," he said. "They were right next to your tent, just standing there." He'd been half asleep when he heard footsteps. When he peeked out, the person was standing just inches from me. As soon as they saw him, they ran off into the woods again. We didn't hear them speak, didn't see where they went, just gone. We didn't even talk much after that. We rebuilt the fire, packed our bags, and sat with our backs to the trees waiting for morning. We didn't sleep a second more. Every crack of a branch made us flinch. Every shadow felt alive. We kept expecting them to come back. As soon as the sun came up, we grabbed our stuff and left without saying a word. We walked fast, barely stopping to catch our breath until we reached the truck. That afternoon, we went to the Pine Brook Sheriff's office. We weren't sure what to say. We didn't want to sound crazy, but we thought someone should know. We described the person and told them about the tent across the swamp. We figured they'd take a note and forget about it. But a few hours later, they called us back. They wanted us to come in again, this time for questions. Turns out that tent? It belonged to someone who had been missing for over 5 weeks. They'd been searching that area but hadn't found anything until now. The tent had been there the whole time. When they showed us a photo of the missing person, Jake and I both said the same thing. It wasn't the person we saw. Whoever we saw that night wasn't the missing hiker. They were someone else. Someone who maybe didn't want us to find that tent. Someone who might have had something to do with what happened. To this day, we don't know who they were. But I still think about how close they were to my tent that night. If Jake hadn't woken up when he did, I might not be here now. We haven't gone camping since, and I don't think we ever will. My name's Jake Morrison, and I'm 27 years old. This happened back in October of 2022, when I lived just outside a small town called Pine Hollow in Oregon. I was staying with my cousin Dave at the time. He owns a big piece of land that stretches way out into the woods, and he didn't mind me pitching a tent out there when I wanted to clear my head. I've always liked being outside. The quiet, the trees, the fresh air. Something about it helps me think. So that fall, I decided to camp. Out for a night. Nothing special, just me, a tent, a small fire pit, and the woods. It was about a 10-minute walk from the house, tucked behind some thick trees where nobody could really see you, unless they knew the land well. The spot I picked wasn't anything fancy. No lake or view, just a little clearing with enough room for my tent and a few logs to sit on. It was peaceful, the kind of place where you could hear the birds during the day and the crickets at night. I headed out around 4 p.m., carrying my gear in a backpack. The air was cool and smelled like leaves and dirt, which I loved. I set up camp, got the fire going, and leaned back in a lawn chair I'd brought with me. As I was relaxing, I noticed something weird. Out in the woods, about 100 yards away, I saw someone walking. Just a dark shape moving between the trees. They weren't coming toward me, more like walking across from the direction of my cousin's house toward the neighbor's land. It was strange because nobody else was supposed to be out there. This was private property, and unless someone came from the road and hiked way in or cut through someone's yard, they wouldn't just end up here by accident. I didn't get a good look at them. Just a figure. I thought about yelling out, but decided not to. They didn't seem to notice me, and I figured maybe it was just someone who got turned around. Still, it gave me a weird feeling in my gut. The next few hours were calm. I made some hot dogs over the fire and sat quietly, listening to the sounds of the woods. Birds, bugs, a few branches cracking now and then. Normal stuff. The sun went down around 6:30, and a soft fog started to roll in. By 7, it was pretty dark, and the woods looked like a black wall around my little campsite. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Fast ones. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer or something, but these footsteps were heavy, like boots slamming against the ground, and they were moving fast. Someone was running, full speed, through the trees. I jumped up and turned toward the sound. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear them. Someone was sprinting through the woods, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, just outside the firelight. They didn't stop or slow down. They just ran right past my camp and kept going deeper into the trees. I stood there frozen, listening until the sound faded completely. I waited a while, trying to calm down, telling myself maybe it was just a jogger. But who jogs out here, in the dark, through thick forest? It didn't sit right with me. I thought about packing up, but I convinced myself it was probably nothing. Maybe some weird neighbor or a teenager trying to scare people. Still, I kept my flashlight close and made sure the fire stayed bright. I stayed up until around 10. The woods were completely silent again, which somehow made it creepier. I finally let the fire die down and crawled into my tent, zipped it up and laid down. I was tired, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of footsteps. Again. But this time they weren't far away. They were right outside my tent, running fast, straight toward me. I sat up so quickly I nearly hit my head on the top of the tent. The footsteps stopped right outside. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just stared at the fabric wall in front of me, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then I saw a shadow. Someone was standing there, just a foot away, leaning back and forth like they were trying to peek through the tent. I could see their shape moving, and then out of nowhere I heard this horrible sound like fabric ripping. They were cutting my tent. A knife slid across the side, slowly tearing it open. And through that slit, I saw a pair of eyes, just staring at me. I didn't think so. I didn't grab anything. I just screamed and ran. I threw myself out of the tent and took off into the woods, yelling as loud as I could. I didn't stop running until I saw the lights of the house. My legs were burning and my chest felt like it was about to explode, but I didn't stop. When I made it inside, I locked every door and called the police. I was shaking so bad I could barely talk. While I was on the phone with the dispatcher, I peeked out the back window and saw someone. There was a figure just standing in the trees way out near the edge of the clearing. They didn't move, just stood there, watching the house. By the time the police arrived, the person was gone. They searched the woods and went back out the next morning to check the campsite. The tent was cut wide open, just like I told them, but they didn't find any footprints or anything else useful. No leads. No answers. The worst part? That person followed me. They knew where I lived. That meant they weren't just some random hiker or lost camper. They were watching me, maybe even waiting. For the next few weeks, I barely slept. Every noise outside made me jump. I put up motion lights, cameras, everything I could think of. Nothing happened after that night, but the fear never really went away. Even now, I still wonder what they wanted. Were they trying to rob me, hurt me, or were they just playing some twisted game? I don't have answers, just a bad memory that still keeps me up sometimes, and the worst part is not knowing if they're still out there, watching, waiting for another night. This happened in November 2017. I was 28 years old at the time, living in Oregon. Back then I was single and had no kids or pets, so I had plenty of time to go camping, which I did often. I'd usually head out on weekends, especially before winter kicked in, since it gets rainy and freezing up here. Once December hits, camping's pretty much off the table. That year I wanted to fit in one last solo trip before the weather got too rough. I took a Friday off work and planned a weekend out in the Elk Ridge Forest, about an hour and a half northeast from where I lived. It's a big quiet area, with hiking trails, streams, and spots to set up a tent. I'd been there before, so I felt safe going alone. The day I left, the sky was gray, but it wasn't raining, just cold. I got to the trailhead around 9 a.m. There were only 2 other cars in the small gravel lot, a tan minivan, and a dark green pickup truck that was covered in dried mud and had scratches all along the sides like it had been driven through some serious brush. I bundled up in a thick hoodie and beanie and started walking. The air was crisp and quiet, and after about 15 minutes I passed an older man and a younger teen, maybe 13 or 14, coming back from the trail. They had big backpacks and looked like they'd camped the night before. We waved, said a quick "hey," and kept moving. That explained the minivan. I figured the pickup belonged to someone further down the trail. About 30 minutes later, I reached the clearing where I planned to stay. It was just how I remembered it, a flat, grassy area beside a slow-moving creek, with tall pine trees surrounding the edges. But no one was there. No tents. No people. Just me and the sound of water running. I picked a spot near the edge of the trees and set up my tent. Then I sat down on a log, pulled out my notebook and wrote for a while. I like writing when I camp. Helps me clear my head. The day was peaceful, but the air kept getting colder as the sun moved across the sky. By the time it was mid-afternoon, my fingers were stiff. So I started gathering wood and built a small fire. Maybe an hour after I got the fire going, someone else walked into the clearing from the trail. It was a man, probably in his late 30s or early 40s. He had a thick coat, gloves, and a cloth mask over the bottom half of his face. Not like a medical mask, but one of those stretchy neck warmers pulled up over his nose. He had a small gray backpack that looked nearly empty. It was all folded in and flat, like there was hardly anything inside. He didn't say anything. He just walked past me, across the fire, and sat down on the other side of the clearing near a big tree. He leaned back and stared at the water. I nodded at him, just being polite, but he didn't nod back. Didn't even glance at me. At first I thought maybe he had a friend still on the trail. Maybe they got separated and were going to meet back here. But time kept ticking by. 15 minutes, then 30. Then nearly an hour. No one else showed up. The man didn't move. He didn't take off his backpack. Didn't check his phone. Didn't even drink water. He just sat there still as a rock, staring at the creek. It started to make me feel uneasy. I was trying not to stare, but I kept sneaking glances. Something felt off. He wasn't acting normal. Most people at least say hi, or nod, or set up their gear. But this guy looked like he wasn't really there, you know? Like his body was there, but his brain was somewhere else. Then, all of a sudden, he stood up and walked toward me. I didn't know what to do. I stayed seated by the fire, and when he reached the other side of the flames, he just sat down and smiled at me. "Hope you don't mind me sitting here," he said. "It's colder than I thought." His voice was calm, but something about it made my skin crawl. I said, "Sure, no problem," trying to sound friendly, even though my stomach was already tight. His smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes looked tired and kind of empty. The smile looked forced, like someone pretending to smile because they thought they should. I asked him, "Did you bring a tent?" "It's gonna be freezing tonight." He shook his head slowly, still smiling. Didn't say anything else. I nodded and looked back at the fire, pretending to poke at it with a stick, but my heart was pounding. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes, without talking. Just silence. The only sound was the fire crackling in the creek nearby. At that point I knew I wasn't staying the night, but I didn't want to make it obvious that I was leaving because of him. So I casually stood up, walked to my tent, and started rolling up my sleeping bag. The whole time I could feel his eyes on me. I turned around at one point, and yep, he was watching me. That same weird smile still on his face. It didn't change. Then, just as quietly as he'd come, he stood up and walked away. Back toward the big tree. But he didn't stop there. He kept going. Right into the woods behind it. I watched him walk between the trees until he disappeared. I stood still for a moment, listening, but I couldn't hear any footsteps. Nothing. Just the fire and the water. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then I started throwing everything into my backpack. I didn't even fold my tent. I just crammed it in. I left the fire burning, hoping that if he was watching from the trees, he'd think I was still there. Then I started walking fast. The trail back was long, about 4 miles, and it was already getting dark. My flashlight helped, but the forest felt different now. Every little sound made me jump. A snapping twig, wind blowing leaves, my own footsteps. I kept thinking he might come running up behind me. For 2 hours I walked through the dark, constantly looking over my shoulder. I didn't hear him. I didn't see anything. But that didn't make me feel safe. It just made me more nervous, like he was waiting for the right moment. Finally, I reached the parking lot. My car was the only one there. The green pickup truck? Gone. If he didn't drive it, then how did he get there? I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove home. My hands didn't stop shaking for a while. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he was planning something or if he was just not right in the head. But I do know this. If I had stayed that night, something bad would have happened. I could feel it in my bones. Maybe he went into the woods to grab something. Maybe he was hiding and waiting for me to fall asleep. Or maybe the smile, the silence, the empty bag. It was all part of some plan. Either way, I never camped alone again. And sometimes even now when I sit by a fire or hear the wind in the trees, I think about that smile, that fake, frozen smile, and the quiet man who came out of nowhere and vanished into the dark.